Welcome back to the Remix Morning Show, everybody.
All right,
Geechee,
peace.
Jared, Kamal, Amber, Erica, and our special guest.
Hi,
Yeah.
greetings, everyone. Greetings. I'm actually quite excited. I love this platform, follow it all the time. A huge fan. My name is Ndindi Kitonga. I'm a Los Angeles-based organizer, a proud member of BAP, of course. And when I'm not doing that, I'm an educator. So I run a small kind of socialist school. I kind of left public school system. And then I also do mutual aid work, and we call ourselves PUMA, kind of Black Panther type of thing, but it stands for Palms Unhoused Mutual Aid. And we support unhoused people. I'm more in the mid-city west Los Angeles area. So I wasn't directly affected or evacuated or anything like this. I used to be a teacher in Altadena, Pasadena area. And so I'm happy to talk about that.
Yeah. So just for those who may not have been keeping up with the last week or so of news, the Eaton fire in Los Angeles County has devastated, I believe, over 14,000 acres. And more specifically, it has threatened the rich cultural history of Altadena and Pasadena, particularly those Black communities there. So the fire's destruction extends beyond property loss. We're talking about the threats of mass displacement, economic predation and exploitation, and then also public health. So I did want to have you on to discuss a little bit about that, but then also discuss like the specific work that BAP SoCAL is doing, and then with other organizations like the CoOp that is being developed. So there's been a lot of focus on this Pacific Palisades and the Malibu areas and where mostly the celebrities are. But I did want to focus on Altadena because I do think that it has not been discussed much in terms of the actual material reality that the people are facing there. So can you tell us a little bit about Altadena? How has Altadena's role and historical role, especially during like the Great Migration, shaped its cultural and historical identity? And what are the specific like historical legacies that are at risk now?
Yeah, thanks. This is a fantastic question, and you're absolutely correct. There's been a hyper focus on the Palisades and celebrities who lost their homes. What's not being talked about the Palisades are the everyday workers who might have not only lost their homes but their jobs. So we're talking domestic workers. We're talking like baristas and people like that in the Palisades. No one's talking about those folks, to be quite frank, and those are predominantly working class Black and brown folks. So I always want to highlight that before I move on to the Pasadena Altadena situation. So Altadena is 18% Black. Los Angeles County is about 9% Black. And so you have more Black folks in Altadena, and there's a specific reason for this. So during the Great Migration, folks kind of early 20th century are fleeing the Jim Crow South. And Pasadena is this kind of up and coming place where you can kind of bring your skill set. There's the first freeway, the 110. I'm on the West Coast. We just call it the something. I'm not sure how they are labeled where you all are, but the 110. And so there's a lot of work. You also have these racial covenants, and you have redlining. And so what happens is, and I should also mention, a lot of the reasons why cities refuse to become incorporated into Los Angeles City proper and end up in Los Angeles County is a lot of them want to maintain their white neighborhoods. They want to maintain their sundown towns. And so anytime you think of a city in Los Angeles County that didn't make it into being Los Angeles City, it's important to look at its history and find out why did they refuse to. And a lot of it is they're saying we wanted to mind our business. And what their business, quite frankly, was to maintain kind of their white-centered, white supremacist towns. They did want Black folks to go and work, but you needed to be gone by 6 p.m. And so Altadena offers an opportunity for folks to buy homes. So what we find, I should also mention that something like 65% of the homeowners and residents of Altadena are over 65 years old. So we're talking about a community of senior Black folks. These homes are not homes that people are flipping to make a buck. These are not homes, these are not vacation homes. These are not second homes for people. In certain cases, for people in the Palisades, they just moved on to the next one, like see you in Santa Barbara type of thing. This is not what's going on in Altadena. So for a lot of people, this is their first home. It is their only home. It is a multi-generational home. So you have many generations living under the same roof. And this is kind of what has been lost. I did want to also mention that post 1968 with the fair housing laws, what Altadena has also been dealing with, quite frankly, is with gentrification. So that has also been one of their struggles. And so now with these historic fires, it's not just the loss and destruction of home, it's all of the types of things that we see everywhere. It's surveillance, it's the National Guard just standing. And I like to use the language of like you're being occupied, quite frankly, right? Like the National Guard, strangers came to stand in front of where your house is and you can no longer access it or whatever. There's curfew laws and they're catching people who are just minding their business and they are arresting folks and they're pretty serious about it. Most of the conversations going on are about looting and crime and what have you, have nothing to do with supporting people, caring for people, or whatever it is that they need. And now speculators are coming around. All sorts of vultures and hawks are coming around, trying to capitalize on people's desperation. I see you've lost everything. Here's a quick check, I'll make this go away type of a thing. So those are some of the issues going on here.
I didn't know if anyone else had a question, but I can ask you another if they don't.
I had a quick question.
Yeah.
I was reading like reports about how a lot of people's home insurance plans were canceled, especially in the Altadena area right before this. So I got a lot of folks that y'all are working with where their plans canceled too. And if not, like, is that where they're getting the quick checks from their actual like home insurance companies?
Yes. So you're absolutely correct. Home insurance is kind of like any other kind of insurance that we have in this nation. Likely has very little to do with protecting you or anyone else. And so we are getting reports and a lot of calls of people who lost their insurance like at the end, because we're at the beginning of the year. So a lot of people, you're in a new policy and this terrible thing happens in the beginning of January. And then you have people's rates just going up arbitrarily. The next step for a lot of us is to support people with paperwork, because I think that's another tool too, is just to bury people with bureaucracy and paperwork and just you do whatever you can do to make it go away. But yes, you're absolutely correct. The state government, Newsom, city officials, they're talking about how to get out of this kind of price gouging situation. But quite frankly, it looks like the insurance companies are, like in all cases, it'll be a Band-Aid at best.
And is there any enforcement around price gouging for rent? Because I was watching this guy from Shahs of Sunset on TikTok. He's helping like people find houses, and he was like, there was an apartment for $13,000, but the landlord said he wanted $20,000. And then when he went to go try to pay him, he said, actually, I want $23,000. And so then the guy from Shahs of Sunset had to go back and be like, hey, this is illegal. But like, what do they do other than telling it's illegal? Like, there's no like punishment or follow up or anything.
They truly have more smoke for people who are doing so-called looting than this particular action. So I don't know if anyone has been paying attention, but every morning they have a presser and they talk about crime, crime, crime. And it's a slap on the wrist for price gouging. And you have to catch the people doing it, meaning you report them. The state and the cities are not actively going after anybody. There's also contingent of people we should mention, like Yimbys in particular. They actually do believe in market forces, and they think that price gouging is appropriate and an opportunity for us to get more housing. It's a very interesting logic. There are also people who can afford to pay these prices, right? Like the people who are displaced from the Palisades. 23K is nothing in rent for them. And in fact, they're like, why couldn't I offer? If I can afford it, why couldn't I offer what I can? You know, why am I being, why can't I access the housing market if I can pay what I can afford? So it's a very interesting kind of landscape. And yes, you're absolutely right. State actors are doing the bare minimum around that.
I do think there's this assumption that the people in the Palisades who are like rich do have like all this money though, and they're like, actually, we don't have that much money. Like Janae Aiko and then we're like, actually, we're not as rich as you think we are. And I think there also should be some conversation about that too, because folks are just assuming that all these celebrities, they can pay these high rents, but a lot of them are renting for a reason. Like they could not afford to buy a house.
Yeah, I think we spoke about that on Wednesday in terms of like the writer's strike in Hollywood kind of opened the door to that people were living paycheck to paycheck. And for some, this was like their entire life savings that led them there to even be able to own something. But for the most part, many of them are renting. So you know, they're in a precarious situation. But I did, to the point that Amber was speaking to earlier about some of this, you know, monetary relief and what's happening with the price gouging and everything. You know, Joe Biden announced a whopping $770 in FEMA assistance. And so I did want to hear from you specifically about the state and federal response to the Eaton fires and how this may reflect patterns of systemic neglect and exploitation. I think you talked about that a bit in terms of Newsom's response and the state's response, but wondering if you can speak a little more in detail about what is actually occurring.
Yeah, this $770 is quite frankly kind of like the paper towels Trump threw at people at one time. It's deeply offensive. It's I don't even know politically what Biden's administration gets out of something like that. It's such a strange stunt. What I should say is the first couple of days, FEMA was kind of nowhere to be seen. And I can say that because a lot of us in mutual aid work all had to just kind of get up and start showing up and figuring out what needs to happen next. There's a lot of gatekeeping when it comes to FEMA. Also, undocumented people can't access these resources. We should start by saying this. People who work like in informal economies, like if whatever your situation isn't documented in a certain way, you are not likely to kind of benefit from FEMA. They've now kicked in applications and this kind of thing. Where this will lead, I don't know. There are a lot of conversations of this looking like a post-Katrina. I will say that when our folks went to like the evacuation sites, we had a couple people who had been in Katrina, and they named it as such. And I'll describe some of the terrible things that we observed ourselves. It was everything from little children who didn't have diapers, the floors are cold, people don't have clothes, people escaped without their medicine, there's mass confusion, there are people like weeping in the corner, people who can't charge their devices, levels of stress. It's also a 24-hour situation, very poor sleep. And it quite frankly, it is, I'm Kenyan. And so I'm a third worlder and I embrace that term, but it very much mirrors what citizens of this country think happens elsewhere. And so, you know, the FEMA response has been as such. There's also gatekeeping of the giant nonprofits. So, you know, I always say give to mutual aid, give to local, give to people who you know, because like the Red Cross started gatekeeping. They started gatekeeping volunteers and they started to conduct their own kind of insular operations, which I guess could have been cool if they were able to meet people's needs. But the reason that we know that they weren't is because our DMs are full and we've, many of us in our collectives it's a 24-hour response of giving people rides. I spent all of, I think Tuesday last week sourcing insulin, you know, like just absurd things kind of going on here. So I would say, yes, that is the city response, that is the state response, that is FEMA response. And I quite expect it to get worse once the cameras move away. I think it'll also be a mass displacement event of Black folks, in the same way Katrina had that element of you will be able to return. And, people did in fact return, but a lot of people lost their homes, and are kind of permanently displaced within these so-called United States. And so part of what our next kind of phase of mutual aid organizing is to try and figure out how people can hold on to where they live and not be displaced by a FEMA or a body of you will be able to come back. Actual real demands around this. And a lot of the demands around this are going to have to be rent control on a very serious level, eviction moratorium. The idea that you can be evicted from a house that's no longer standing is absurd. We didn't talk about Hollywood, and I'm glad Amber kind of brought it up, because you're right, absolutely. Very few people are wealthy where we live. Like this is a working city. And so when you talk about the folks who lost their homes in Hollywood, those are predominantly renters. They might be people in the industry, but you're talking about junior costumers. You're talking about gaffers. You're talking about people in unions. You are talking about everyday folks who are working, trying to get into these industries, moonlighting as a barista by day, writing a script by night, showing up on a set. Like this is who lost their homes as well. And so rent protections are going to be huge. And quite frankly, we're into the revolutionary squat, take it over, do what you got to do type of thing.
So I feel like you're starting to hit on this during this time period. Like obviously it's extremely chaotic. People are trying to find housing, trying to salvage what they can. But in the middle of it, it sounds like you guys are beginning to organize. So what are the conditions for organizing? How are people responding? And maybe talk just a little bit more about some of the near future plans or ongoing plans to try to rally people to, again, during this time period of hardship, do what they can to stay put and to reclaim, as opposed to be dispersed, right? And sometimes it's out of folks' hands and they have to do what they have to do in the short term. But how are you guys dealing with that in the middle of the what's happening?
Yes, this is a fantastic question. One great thing I will say is a lot of infrastructure has been built out of the multiple iterations of movements we've had. I've certainly been around since the early 2000s, and we have all sorts of newcomers. And so we have kind of independent tenants unions, and those push really hard. I work with the unhoused folks, and our understanding is a tenant is any single person who cannot control their housing and has no control of their housing. So this includes unhoused people. This includes people who are incarcerated and in prisons. These include traditional renters such as myself. And it's moving slowly, but this has been a really politicizing and radicalizing event for a lot of folks. Our little hub has grown by a couple hundred people who are just in a burn it down mode, but let's see what we can build mode as well. So that part of it is exciting. So how we harness the energy. Also, Los Angeles is huge and it's widespread. And so there's a lot of hyper local tenants union organizing already happening. If you kind of watch the space as we say, you'll see in the next couple of weeks a lot of demands from the city. And I'm confident that we're going to get a lot of what we're asking for. This is also an opportunity for organizing around jails and prisons, of which California has the biggest system. And so the plight of incarcerated firefighters, youth in particular, has really been at the forefront. And so California did vote in this kind of last election, as you all know, for some regressive things, including upholding involuntary, what do you call it? Involuntary work when people are incarcerated. And we also have a new DA, and there's new criminalization around like quality of life things, right? So like the penalties for, you know, minor crimes, drug possession type of things, and like shoplifting is, you know, there's a hyper focus on these type of things. And so the push for the housing justice also has to be in conjunction for push against carcerality and criminalization of folks. And we're already seeing this in Altadena from this Eaton fire, where people go and try and visit people and get caught up by National Guard, get arrested for trying to mind their business and not, you know, being where you're supposed to be during curfew. So it's going to have to be a lot of that as well. Trying to think of what other mobilization.
But I'm sorry to jump in, but isn't that part of the beautiful contradiction of all this incarceration? Because we keep seeing stories also about how they just release some of these prisoners to fight the fires. So it seems like it works. We'll just arrest more people as a result of the fires, and then we'll have them go back out and fight the fires that they were then arrested for taking advantage. So it just seems like a perfect little system that California is demonstrating for the rest of us here.
Yeah. Yeah, it's absolutely grind you down under capitalism and come on and work for free for something like $24 a day with very little sleep. I should mention, actually, we have received some requests for folks who are fighting these fires in need of PPE, which was truly shameful and weird to me to have people who are supposed to be working for the state in need of PPE. And the incarcerated folks, a lot of great articles have come out around this. It's extremely dangerous work. They describe it as like working in a furnace. And you're breathing in everything, you know, it's not just plants that are burning out there. It is truly, truly dangerous work. So part of our kind of housing organizing is make sure like no one is left behind. There's also this idea that there's now the deserving unhoused and the deserving poor versus the undeserving unhoused and the undeserving poor. And so we're trying to keep it tight, right? Make sure that even if you are newly displaced and newly housed, that you know, all of us who've been fighting these housing justice struggles, particularly on the unhoused front, that those folks aren't left behind. If checks are to be cut, if programs are to be put out there. And we all know there'll be reformists, but there are certain things I think that are worth pushing and maybe getting behind in the interim as we figure out how to collectively get free.
You spoke a lot about the mass displacement, but I do want to talk about the prospect of this being a mass disabling situation, even in terms of the PPE mask. One of the things that I do know that has been reported out by organizations and organizers is that the city came to them to get PPE masks en masse, like Karen Bass and a lot of the institutions that did not have, like FEMA or the Red Cross, that had no access or had none left, had to come to organizers for the PPE. But you also mentioned that a lot of the homeowners are over 65 years old, right? So the medications and things that they would need access to. So I think I think there is some room to discuss what is the possibility of this being mass disabling.
Yes, we absolutely have been calling it both a mass displacement and mass disabling event. What I can report we've heard so far is, beyond the sourcing things like insulin, is albuterol, and we've managed to source some of these things by the pallet with no support from state or city or anyone else. Things like nebulizers, people with things like COPD, we expect these to get worse. And you're absolutely right, with seniors, access to medications, loss of paperwork, the general bureaucracy of it all, chronic conditions, like if you are somebody who needs, like chemotherapy, or you're on dialysis, it's not that just people lost their homes. It's that they lost those community centers that do some of these things as well. People lost kind of like their community daycare, and all of those types of things. And now I should also say, part of mutual aid organizing, a lot of it is led by women and femmes, and a lot of people who already have many caretaking responsibilities. And so we expect that to really for not just organizers, but for everyone, that everyone's caretaking responsibilities will now increase, and and people will also be forced to kind of double up in their homes, right? So maybe you weren't taking care of children before and elders, and we're trying to organize and think a little better around how we can support people and what to do around that. And also, we're talking about seniors who might have been living alone, who lost those homes and now can't afford the skilled nursing facility or whatever your insurance should offer you in the meantime. Yeah, there's many open questions here. The public health guidance is very much like it was in COVID, kind of non-existent, like do what you can do best, wear a mask if you feel like it, but it's not robust and the messaging is very poor. So it's up to organizers. There's a Clean Air Collective who does the data and puts it out there, and we're doing all the political ed and giving out the flyers and all of these types of things. The type of thing, it absolutely is state abandonment in the most classic sense.
I don't know what our time is like, but you mentioned at the beginning in your introduction that you run a socialist school. And since you were explicit with that, I'd really love to hear a little bit more about the school and how you deem it socialist, because that's very, cool.
Yeah, thank you. I'll try not to rant. It is my passion. So we are Angelus Workshop School. Like I mentioned, I've been an educator for a long time. So about 11 years ago, my partner and I, we just a group of parents came to us and they said, hey, you're talking about capitalism in your classes. I'm a science teacher, they're a humanities teacher. I was talking about capitalism and chemistry and all of these types of things. Hey, it's a thing. And, a group of parents came to us and they said, hey, have you all considered doing a micro school? Because we want to spend more time engaging with these topics. And that's kind of what we did. We're a community school the model is always like 50 or less. And we're grade 6 through 12. And it's for kind of community-minded folks who are really, really interested in anti-capitalist education for themselves, for the communities. It's an opportunity for us to also, I also will say it's very intellectual academic rigor type of thing. So we don't have the worksheets. We're reading Capital. We're going to learn some critical thinking and move slowly. And we're going to write papers and we're going to go out in our communities. And a lot of my students are involved in Puma with me and go on to universities to kind of do that kind of thing. But yeah, I'm always happy to talk about it all you like. But the model comes out of, liberation schools. We're very interested in a lot of models from Brazil, like from Paulo Freire. We're very interested in the work of educators like Cabral and like what does it mean to be educated in this moment as a young person? What's ultimately going to matter? And young people care about being free as well. And so if they ask us to do it, we're going to do it. So yeah.
Comrade, you're not going to mention the Shakur School, the CMB Neighbor Program?
Yeah, I'm sorry. There's so many.
They are members of BAP.
Yes, I really wasn't expecting this one.
Ndindi, did you want to talk about the CoOp? Because that is the collective that is members of SoCAL, BAP, and CMB, and I think AAPRP now are doing. So I think that's a base for where people are picking up some of the mutual aid as well. So I didn't know if you want to talk about that.
Yes, I will very quickly because I know our time is up here. So yes, in this co-op with BAP BAP and all of these other organizations, we are lucky enough to have a couple of independent bookstores and a couple of community hubs. And if you know the price of real estate in Los Angeles, like it really is a heavy lift. And it's one that's not just supported from people in Los Angeles. We see the support that we get from everywhere all around. And so there are hubs for, we're moving supplies, a lot of political ed. And the supplies are not just for people in disasters. There's a hub I went to in Inglewood the other day, Black Lantern Books, and it was people not even necessarily affected by fires, you know. The economy is bad all around. And so there's need all around. And then there's folks who are now, like I said, doubling up and supporting other people too. And so it's an opportunity for mutual aid. Of course, it's the usual donations that we understand. But I also like to think of mutual aid. We have to go beyond redistribution. It is also fundamentally about changing our social relations and opportunities to like change how we think about our material lives. And that's the excitement of the CoOp. A lot of new people with energy who might be new to the concepts, but are about it. And so, yes, I'll stop talking there, but I'm happy to drop all sorts of links in the chat when I get off.